Benin has joined the queue with multiple coup attempts on the West African sub-region. Benin prosecutors on Wednesday evening announced a successful thwarted coup to overthrow President Patrice Talon, slated for September 27, 2024. In that light, 3 personalities were apprehended, notably the former sports minister Oswald Homeki, a businessman and closer friend of President Talon, Olivier Boko, as well as the commander of the presidential guard, Jimon Dieudonné. As investigation unfolds, a further arrest are possible in the coming days across the West African nation, especially in the capital, Cotonou. According to a research paper by the African Union on coups in the West African sub-region, there are implications which can affect the fight against terrorism and violent extremism. For the case of Benin, the nation has in recent years reiterated its commitment to cooperate on security challenges affecting the region. However, with this attempt from close allies of the presidency, the worry becomes alarming and reminds us of the coup plot that consumed the Burkina Faso's former leader, Thomas Sankara. The Beninese journal Le Beninois Libéré reported that a dozen names of deputies have emerged within the investigation, information still under review. President Talon is expected to hand over power to a new leader in 2026, and Olivier Boko is likely to show interest in the nation's top job. Just a few days ago, we asked ourselves the question, what was destabilizing the African continent? And numerous pundits cited a long list of factors, including governance systems as well as others within the African continent. Is these endless coup attempts for the threat to regional stability? Join us as we debut today's conversation in the course of today's edition of Talking Point. Stay with us. Hello, fervent televiewers and listeners of Talking Point, and for you, Media Africa. You're welcome to this edition of Talking Point via your Pan-African channel, where today we pick interest in the West African nation of Benin with this latest update that erupted just a few days ago in the West African country pertaining to the leadership of President Patrice Talon. Just to note that a coup attempt was thwarted in the West African country, citing 3 key figures in the country, close ally to the president's presidential guard, as well as the former sports minister in the West African country. We asked ourselves, is this endless coup attempt in the West African nation an attempt to destabilize or further destabilize the West African sub-region? And of course, as it further poses a threat to regional stability. We shall be unfolding this and discussing these very on topic in the course of today's edition of the program. Meanwhile, I would welcome Mr. Nelson Afrimo AMANDONG, who is an educator, peace and development advocate, equally the author of Rethinking Peace and Stability, the Primacy of Development and Economic Progress over Democracy, was joining us all the way here from Cameroon. Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to join us this day.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be part of this very important program.
It's a pleasure to have you. Out of the African continent, we're currently been joined by Dr. Stanley of FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist, economist, and the CEO of CROSTON FINTECH. Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to be with us.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and thank our viewers for tuning in as well. Hope today we will have a fruitful conversation.
Absolutely, we look towards fruitful conversation as far as today's topical menu on the table is concerned. But before we dive right into discussions, we are going to listen, or better still watch, this excerpt carefully selected from what the state prosecutor in terms of financial crimes in the West African nation of Benin had to say as far as the attempted coup that was thwarted in the West African nation is concerned. Let's have a listen. We shall be right back.
Initial investigations have revealed that the commander of the Republican Guard, who is responsible for the security of the head of the state, was approached by Minister Oswald Homeki on his own behalf and on behalf of Mr. Oliver Boko, with a view to carrying out a coup d'etat by force on 27 September 2024.
Indeed, there was an attempted coup d'etat that took place in the West African nation, but thanks to the authorities of the country, they were able to foil this attempt to destabilize the democratic elected government. So, debut this edition of the program with you, Mr. Amandong. Now, being a peace and development advocate, what do you think accounts for this endless coup attempt which we are seeing in the West African sub-region?
As far as I'm concerned, one thing that accounts for the endless coups is, two things: poverty and foreign influence. Those are the two things that I think are the most factors that that account for the repeated coups. Because if you look at West Africa is made up of I think 16 nations, of which a good part of those nations are very poor, poverty-stricken nations. And if you look at statistics has it that 63% of the combined GDP of the ECOWAS zone is contributed by Nigeria, which all the combined GDP is just around 633 billion US dollars. Which is lower than the GDP of Poland. If looking at it again, you see that as far as West Africa is concerned, of the 16 nations, I think just 3 of them could be qualified as real nations. The rest of them are just small patch of poverty striking nations. That I think poverty and political instability is caused by influence, and this poverty level is what is the major reason of the instability in the region. Because it is said that a hungry man is an angry man. When people are hungry, they want to look for a means to try to solve their problems. And that has been the reason that we have a lot of coups. And if you look at it, most of the coups are taking place in very poor countries and very small and poor countries. So to me, poverty and foreign influence are the major reasons for the coup plot. And as far as it's concerned, if you look at the West African zone, a lot of instability is happening there. Then with all of this instability, the nations are just too small that even a very wealthy individual in a foreign country can finance a coup in those very small countries. So the case of Benin, to me, I think, is poverty and some sort of foreign influence as responsible for the coups in that region.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amandong. Just to highlight that most of these countries in the West African sub-region are dealing with spiral and insecurity attributed to, say, these terrorist groups that are plaguing the Sahel sub-region. And now to continue with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to your co-panelists who attributed the, say, long-standing and endless coups to coup attempts in the West African sub-region to poverty as well as foreign influence. Now, being a Pan-Africanist, from your point of view, why do you think we have these attempts to wanting to destabilize already existing, like to call in quotes, democratic elected governments?
Well, if the democratic elected government is not working for the people, then the reality is that folks will one day, have to rise up to be able to find ways in which they can be able to make things better for themselves. I think it is not strange that, closely related neighbors within the same geographical area, are having this incentive to be able to topple governments that, in their opinion, has not worked well for them. Obviously, my co-panelist is talking talking about on the economic front. We are having tremendous pain in these areas, on the economic front in relationship to the fact that you have young people who have gone to school and they have no work. You have a rising population that is asking themselves, when will the status quo change? You have a government that is very interested in bringing somewhat infrastructural development, and so that by the time you calculate their GDP, you will have the sense that things are moving well in the country. But the Human Development Index in itself is, it's really nothing to write home about. So we are having, people who are totally disenfranchised, folks who are looking for a better way, and they are asked, maybe, in their minds, they're thinking, if we can just support the government, we might be better suited to make things happen. I think that in the case of, in the case of Benin, you're looking at, I think, Oliver Boko, who, is a businessman, quite prosperous in his own right. I mean, he's running a lot of things within the country, who is looking at himself and says, maybe, as somebody who absolutely has the capacity for job creation, working in the private sector, somewhat he's actually, more of a para-government organization, but doing things, in the country, making things happen. I think in his opinion, he's thinking that he's in a better place to be able to, to steer this ship and take them to somewhat of a promised land. But the reality is that once we have a country where the Human Development Index is low, where people look at themselves, it doesn't matter exactly what the GDP of the country is. That's totally irrelevant. We have to basically calculate, what is the happiness? How are the people, how do they look at themselves? We have to calculate and ask ourselves, how do they feel? What is the life expectancy? Are the improvements in sectors like the healthcare? Are the improvements, in basic, stuff like electricity? Once those are not being done, then we are in deep trouble. If you look at Benin has done very well, especially by improving its seaport, because it's landlocked to about 2 different countries, I think Niger and Burkina Faso. They have done well. On the agricultural sector, they are doing great. They are absolutely doing what they're supposed to do. But the reality is that this does not translate to the guys, who are the young people, folks who are looking for greener pastures. This does not translate to them at all, because most of these sectors do not help, the local population. In agriculture, for example, they are primarily dealing with cotton, which is like their major export, but there's no conversion, of this cotton into, maybe there's no booming, thriving textile, community. And so it is extremely quite difficult for them to be able to talk about, bringing young people to work. Unfortunately, a lot of the population is unemployed, and so folks are just getting angry, and this is why we are experiencing what we are experiencing today.
So, in your opinion, it's a disgruntled population that is striving to let the government hear their cry as far as, say, creating more jobs or getting them more implicated in the affairs of the nation?
Obviously, everyone who basically set up a coup is literally trying to become a hero to the masses. And so someone is basically stepping up, hearing what the population is saying. A lot of folks are in their ears, and then they have the Superman hero complex saying, you know what, I can do something about it. I will be able to put an end to whatever is happening. And that's how these coups actually do happen. They don't happen in a vacuum. You do not have a country that is prosperous, where everyone is making money, where the economic outlook looks good, where the Human Development Index is fantastic. You don't have those countries experiencing coup. You only have those countries where things are dire, things are really bad. I think, don't forget exactly how bad a country like Niger was. It was at the bottom of all economic indexes. It was right at the bottom of it. And so, but now, the coup came, and they kind of turned that ship around miraculously, and things are looking really good. So that is what goes on when the country decides that they will not be able to focus more on the population in relationship to trying to make sure that they get young people to work, rather than trying to be able to please the World Bank by coming out with a GDP that looks very good, that paint the whole entire country on a good trajectory on this economic outlook, but then the people within the country are dying just so that they can be able to get loans from overseas. That's kind of stupid. I think that we really need to focus on those, in the nation and try to find out exactly what they're looking for and what makes them happy, because that's how you prevent these things from happening as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Now to proceed with you, Mr. Amandong, you listened to what your co-panelists had to say. Earlier on, you cited two factors that could be attributed to these attempted coups that we're seeing in the West African sub-region, amongst which you cited foreign influence. I would like to capitalize on that. With the West African sub-region, initially, coups used to happen in countries that were former colonies of France, but then we saw a change of things, a shift in dynamics when we reported an attempted coup in Nigeria some time ago. But then with these happening in Benin, one of the key factors, facilitators of say cooperation in terms of security in the West African sub-region, when you look at this aspect of foreign interference, do you believe that it is one of those tools that are being used to destabilize the West African sub-region and to a greater extent the African continent?
Yes, I think so. If you look keenly at the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, where European nations sat and distributed their powers and created small nation states for them to have your influence over Africa. Then after that, we had colonization. We had the first World War, the Second World War, the fight for independence and new colonialism and so on. You've seen that the so-called former colonies, they've always tried to maintain their grip on these small African nations. Like if you look at France, a nation like France, we talk about the colonial pact that France signed with some of her colonies for them to try to attain, as a condition for them to attain independence. Some of the clauses of the the colonial pact made provisions for a nation like France to have continuous influence on the military, economic, and political aspects of the nations. So if you look at it keenly, many leaders from Francophone West Africa and even Central Africa, they try to do their best to please the president of France. He's some kind of a godfather to them. And there are some African leaders too who have said they are the best students. I remember one African leader who said he's the best student of Francois Mitterrand. So you see, it's like many of the African leaders, particularly in Francophone West Africa, it's like they are trying to please their French political godfathers before trying to please their own people. Yes. Then looking at it again, the instability in the Sahel region. Of course, it's common information that there's a lot of foreign influence there, particularly France again. So you see, they have an indirect way to always trying to come into the African affairs to try to put some sort of a puppet leader, a leader that will be answerable to them. So we cannot in any way wedge aside the aspect of foreign influence in some of these coups. Take the case of a country like Mali. In Mali recently, we had other groups that are coming up to try to topple the present leader of Mali. So it's just like that, just foreign influence, greed, poverty, and so on. Those are issues that are trying to influence the many coups, and it's not going to end. There are several coups that will continue to come until the people of those nations are economically stable. Because without economic stability, there cannot be political stability. That's my take.
Yeah, you mentioned that economic stability equals political stability. Your co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD, had cited in his previous response that when you look at a nation like Benin as compared to what it was in the past and what it is actually now in the future, the country seems to have skyrocketed in terms of its economic index, given that the country is a true and great exporter of cotton. Now, with that, do you believe that, say, the economic freedom of the country, aside from that, it's another way, or could these discrepancies actually attribute to this recent coup which we've seen in the West African nation?
Okay, like my co-panelist said, he made a point that was very clear. All of these things about growth, we just see figures, but the ordinary man does not feel it. Until I feel fine, I feel that my bills are being paid, I'm able to solve my problems. All of those figures don't mean anything to anybody.
That is true.
So the people in the country want to feel their country. Whatever figures that you have on the ground, well, they are good, like my co-panelist said, to try to create a good brand for the country. But what about the people who are living in the country? What about their day-to-day life, their day-to-day struggles? So if people are not stable with their day-to-day struggles, it's not going to be easy. Because without you capable of paying your bills, it's not going to be easy. Because until people are economically stable, capable of paying their bills and doing all these things, they will always want political change, because political decisions are affecting their day-to-day lives. So that's how I see it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amandong. I'll proceed with you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, could these calls, which we have attributed to numerous factors in a bit or attempting to destabilize the continent, be it constitutional or military, because this is not the first time that we are saying that there are factors that are attributed to or are attempting to destabilize Africa. Remember, a few days ago, we had a conversation asking the question, what was destabilizing the continent of Africa? With this recent coup, could we attribute this factor as well to one of those things that are, say, changing or bringing about this wind of change on the African continent?
I think we need to focus a little bit more in trying to understand what we perceive democracy to be.
Absolutely.
And the reason for that is because we have the West pushing this whole entire idea about democracy on the African continent, but yet she is not a democracy. I'm speaking specifically about the United States of America. So there's no big supporter or pusher of democracy on the African continent than the United States. So she claims to push democracy on the African continent, but she is not a democracy. The United States of America is something called a constitutional republic, which is very different from a democracy. As a matter of fact, it was a democracy, it will not even work. Now, here we are on the African continent, and we have been given this whole entire concept of a democracy that is quite foreign to us. It has nothing to do with our customs, values, and traditions. We are different people, we are made up differently. And so I think that we really have to address this issue going forward, because it has not worked for us as Africans. On the African continent, the concept of democracy has not worked. Talk less in the United States of America, because clearly there is nothing in America as democracy. What has worked for them is the constitutional republic, which I think that we can be able to adapt that same principle on the continent of Africa, and it will do us much good, where we have more of a federal system, and that really works, so that people in different areas of the country can hold whoever is in leadership on that particular area responsible for whatever is happening out there, rather than having a centralized system of power where one person is at the top and basically tell everybody else what to do. That is absolutely ineffective, because eventually you will have people in power who has not been elected by anybody making decisions for everyone. That is absolutely crazy. We need to be able to have a decentralized system. So if we are talking about, how we are able to move forward on the political front, I think that we must be able to address the issues of our democratic institutions and try to find out what works for the African. Secondly, while we are at this, we need to be able to make sure that we have quite inclusive governments. The idea that you can have a government and only your buddies and your friends, are running stuff, that's really not good. We need to be able to have people in power that are competent, people in positions of authority that have the key competence to be able to handle those positions. You cannot just get somebody because, this person is your countryman, he's from your tribe, he's your village person, and then you bring that particular person to come and run some ministry with absolutely no idea what it's all about, no skill sets, no education to foster or support this particular individual to be of the greater benefit or the greater good to the people. This individual will become, just a caricature of what that position entails. They will end up, embezzling, end up carrying money, doing whatever they have to do, mismanage the whole entire, sector just because they have no skill sets for it. We must be able to make sure that we are quite inclusive in relationship to our politics. And if we can just do those two things, I think it's going to basically push other sectors of the economy to respond favorably, because we will have people who are more skilled, more gifted in their areas of expertise to help us push and steer this ship, which is our nations, to where we ought to go. I think that we really must focus in these areas, because what we have now has not worked. It hasn't worked for the last 6 decades on the African continent. Everywhere it's struggling. So it's the notion of democracy, so far as the African is concerned, is an illusion.
Well, you cited something. You said a constitutional republic. It's the only way, or the only factor that will work for the African person. Now, Dr. FONGOD, when you look at Benin, you're looking at President or the incumbent leader, Patrice Talon, who is supposed to leave power or hand over power to a new president come 2026. He is in his second constitutional term in office, which is expected to end, say, in 2026. Now, do you believe, or would you say that Benin is some sort of a constitutional republic? And do you think that this coup actually is, this attempted coup came in at the right time?
What the idea,
or there is some controversy over it?
Well, the idea that Benin is some kind of a constitutional republic, it's really differs from whatever the definition of a constitutional republic is. So in a constitutional republic, there are 3 different things, 3 equal branches of government that absolutely has total control, and they have full control. So you have the judiciary, you have basically the legislative, and you have the executive. So with these 3 equal branches of government must be in place and must be in power. If you look at what is happening on the African continent, the president of every single country basically tells, the House of Assembly, which is basically the legislative, those are the guys who set our laws, what to do. They do whatever they have to do. They do the beating of the president. The president is the king, he is the pope, he is the god of, the whole entire country, and that is not how that works. That's what happened in a democracy. So technically speaking, in the democracy, you basically get one particular individual to power, and the person that you have given to power, you basically have given that individual a blank check. He can do whatever he wants to do, and he tells the judiciary what to do. He tells the court, what, this is exactly what I'm looking at, and you better, do what I'm saying, or certain things will happen to you. That's exactly what happens. Look at every single country on the African continent. There is absolutely no separation of powers. It's always one person at the top who has total autonomy, to do whatever he wants, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And the only way to get that particular person out of power is to do what? Is to, basically create coups.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Now to proceed with you, Mr. AMANDONG. You are the author of Rethinking Peace and Stability, the primacy of development as well as economic progress over democracy. Now, being a critical thinker, in your opinion, how can West Africa, being a sub-region that is reeling from numerous challenges, from insecurity to economic woes, as well as these spiraling coup attempts which we've seen in the West African sub-region, how can the region as a bloc, as a region in itself, rethink its peace strategies to ensure that there is stability within the region?
They should prioritize economic development. Prioritize economic development and education. Developing their human capital, that's key. Because if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you will understand that democracy is a secondary need. Democracy is a secondary need. It's not a primary need. Because when people are poor, people are instinctively want to meet their basic needs. Until people are economically stable, people can provide their basic needs, democracy will never make any sense to them. It will never make any sense because it's a secondary need. The first need of people is economic survival. Is economic survival. You're capable of meeting your needs and so on. Without which it is not going to do anything. Any dictator or whosoever comes to power should prioritize the economic development and education of their people before any other thing. If you look at the Sahel, what is happening in the Sahel, those three guys they are trying to present themselves as some kind of benevolent despot. That is a group of a leader who is working, doing his best to work in the interest of the people. Any leader that will bring development and progress to the ordinary African, the ordinary African will prefer that kind of a leader. Democracy is a secondary need. So to me, to keep aside all of these things, the primary need is to provide the basic needs of the people. And the only way you can provide the basic needs of the people is economic development that meets the needs of the ordinary people. Without which, it would the saying goes, the hungry man is an angry man. There will always be uprising, there will always be political instability. So long as people are hungry, so long as people cannot meet their basic needs, any other endeavor will not work. Then on top of that, the kind of democracy that we want to practice here is something that was just copied from the Western world, and they want to come and paste it here, not knowing that we are culturally very different with the West, culturally very different. So the model of democracy of the Western world can never work in Africa. It will only work in Africa to the degree to which people are economically stable. That's when you can introduce democracy and people might want to listen to you. But as of now, the priority of Africa is economic development.
Yeah, you mentioned, Mr. Amandong, that the priority of Africa is economic development, but equally cited education. There's been this recent or renewed call across the African continent that the education system, for instance, should be revamped or revisited for it to be able to suit the context of the African continent, especially as Africa is headed towards its own total independence. But then away from that, you started the question, and you raised the question around the term democracy. When you look at the African continent, do you believe that this term democracy, or it actually suits the context of the African continent? And of course, if not, what is going to work best for Africa?
Yes, as far as democracy is concerned, it doesn't suit the African context because the root of democracy is Western individualism. The root of democracy is Western individualism. That has been like you see today we have the Universal Declarations of Human Rights, again rooted in Western individualism. Meanwhile, in Africa, we are collectivists in terms of our culture. So democracy, as it is in the Western world or defined by Westerners, can never work in Africa because of the fact that we are culturally very different. So it cannot work in our African context. So
okay.
to me,
yeah.
Please
proceed.
To me, yes, many people are of the option that a benevolent despot is what is good for Africa because of the place in which we find ourselves today. Africa is way behind, is lacking behind compared to the rest of the world. So we need a serious, some kind of a revolution. Like when Stalin came to power in 1933 in Russia, he made a statement that we are 100 years behind the developed West. Either we close this gap in 10 years or they crush us. I think Africa is in that same kind of position because we are seriously lacking behind. We need a revolution in thought, a revolution in our ideas, and many other things, because the democracy that we have today is a pseudo democracy. And the way in which things are evolving, if we continue to move in this path, we are not going anywhere. We need a revolution in thought, and I think a benevolent despot, that kind of leader who is there, he has the interest of the people at heart. That's what I think will take Africa in this particular situation in which we are. Democracy will not solve it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amandong. Now, to proceed with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to what your co-panelists had to say. In your opinion, from a different perspective, what would you say are some of those strategies that needed to be put in place to take the West African sub-region forward and, of course, bring about stability?
Well, I'm in support of what my co-panelists said, and I think that we really have to be able to look and find ways in which we try as much as we can to make sure that we separate Human Development Index with economic performance. And the reason for that is because if you look at the Human Development Index, you're looking at issues like healthcare, you're looking at things like education and standard of living. So those are the key components of Human Development Index. But when you look at the economic performance, we are looking at GDP per capita, we are looking at income inequality, we are looking at unemployment or employment rate, and then trying to find exactly how sustainable the economy might be. That in itself means nothing, because by the time we're looking at, trying to go to get money, which is the primary objective of every single government on the African continent, is to borrow. Have you realized that there's no country on the African continent, including South Africa, whose primary objective is not to borrow money from some outside source? I mean, it's as if to say we have come to a place, irrespective of how rich we are in relationship to our natural resources, that all we have to do is to be able to borrow. There are no financial instruments on the African continent in relationship to our mass wealth of natural mineral resources. All we're doing is just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And the one key component that the World Bank will be looking at is not even the Human Development Index. The World Bank could care less whether we are happy or not. The World Bank is just trying to figure out if we can pay our bills. And so the GDP, which is the key component of the economic performance, is what is it that they're looking for. So that does not account for the overall health of the entire population in relationship to their happiness, in relationship to health and life expectancy. So those are some of the things that we have to be able to focus on. How do we go forward from here? I believe sincerely that we must be able to do major investments in infrastructure, but those infrastructures must be geared towards human development rather than economic performance, which means why should a country, for example, like Benin just spend a lot of money, constructing roads to where and for what? Because, I mean, the reality is that the roads is only as good as if we have some form of industrialization within the country. We are already spending 70% of the workforce, it's now in agriculture, most of which is in the cotton fields. And as a result of that, we already know exactly what we are getting in relationship to, transportation and everything else. But we are putting money, a heavy investment. But none of those investments translate into industries. None of those investments translate into, at least getting into a process of us taking raw materials, transforming them into semi-finished goods before exporting them. And why not just go full swing into, for example, Benin, most export is cotton. Why not just go fully and open up a robust textile industry? So that rather than, sending cottons out of the country, we are actually sending out textile, we are sending out materials, we are sending out finished goods. That would be employment not just for Benin, but employment, that I don't think that the population of Benin will be able to handle, the industry and the secondary industries that will emerge as a result, of that. So we really have to focus on how we help the African in relationship to their Human Development Index. To me, that's like the basis of it all. I don't care who runs the nation. I could care less who is in power. What I care about is how the people feel. What I care about is the issues of life expectancy. What I care about is infant mortality. What I care about is access to healthcare. Do we have these things? I don't care who you bring to power. You can bring anybody you want. The bottom line is this: what is it that we are getting for those we have placed in power? What are they doing to the country? That's what matters to me.
Absolutely, like you said, if these measures are taken into consideration, is going to go a long way in boosting the economic growth of the African continent. To stay with you, Dr. FONGOD, now disassociating ourselves from the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES countries, which we've started, are doing well in terms of their development index, but away from that, what could be sparking this revolution, or this revolution we are seeing across the West African sub-region that we're seeing in recent times? And could we say that this is a quest for power, or merely some sort of external influence, like your co-panelists had earlier on cited?
I think it's a combination of both. First of all, we cannot underestimate the level of chaos and turmoil that has come out of that's come into the Sahel region as a result of Libya. I think that the Arab Spring brought into sub-Saharan Africa, an untold amount of suffering. So we have had, the Arab Spring might have ended, even though the consequence of it still lies in places like Libya and somewhat Tunisia, and Algeria for that matter. But the reality is that if you look at the sub-Saharan region, especially north of the sub-Sahara in the Sahel belt, you will realize that they have suffered tremendously as a result of the insurgency, that spewed in coming from places like Libya. So we are still suffering from that. So if you are asking me, where do we go from here? If you're asking me, how do we address this particular issue? I'm still thinking that despite the fact that these boys are creating the federation of their own, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, I think we have to be able to get ECOWAS still involved in somewhat in creating a more buffer zone, in making sure that this insurgency that is spewing in from places like Libya does not continue. Whether we like it or not, if we just sit on the sidelines and say we're not going to do anything, sooner or later, this will be on our doorsteps. Whoever knew that ISIS will be operating in northern Nigeria? Whoever knew that ISIS of the Greater Sahara will be operating in northern Cameroon? Whoever knew that places like Mali, places like Timbuktu will be swarmed with insurgency, will be swarmed with terrorist organizations as far back as the Middle East, but they are present on African soil, they are creating havoc on African soil, they are recruiting young men who are totally disenfranchised with the whole entire political system and the economic state in which they are in, which is the reason why these men comes in the first place, and they are creating tremendous havoc. We have to be able to put an end to this. I think that if there be any other existential threat to the African, it is going to be that of radical Islam. We have to be able to put an end to this, because the truth of the matter is that for the development of the African continent, religion is not part of the equation. Religion has never been part of the equation. Long before the 6th century when Muhammad came along, long before the 1st century when Christianity began ruling, somewhere on the horn of Africa, the African was here, and the African had their methods of worship and their ways of basically reaching out to God, which, so far as I'm concerned, it's not a bad idea at all. We have to be able to make sure that we foster and push the development and the growth of the African on the African continent, without us looking over our shoulders because someone is telling us that if you do not believe this way, certain things will happen to you. If you believe this way, certain things will happen to you. That is not African. That's not who we are. And any African who buys this idea is absolutely a coward. And I wonder exactly, how demented you can be.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. I will coming back to you as far as that is concerned, but I'd like to proceed with you. Mr. AFRISOH, now, on Tuesday, we saw the objective for 2026 movement in Benin, which supports the businessman Olivier Boko's possible candidacy for the 2026 presidential elections. Now, in a statement, they condemned his alleged arrest and called it some sort of political attack. Now, in line with this, let's go further for some sort of in-depth analytical point of view. How controversial is it that a possible candidate in the upcoming elections for 2026 in the country, which is or happens to be a close ally and friend of the incumbent president, to be involved in a coup attempt to destabilize the government of the country?
When it comes to political coups in Africa, it's a complicated issue, and it has a lot of different causes and influences. There could be a possibility that coup was planned to frustrate his 2026 candidacy. That's a possibility. It could also be that he is not seeing a possibility for him to become president by 2026, and he's looking for a shortcut. So when it comes to political coups in Africa, it's very complicated. A lot of issues that you cannot be too sure. You cannot be too sure about the facts, because there could be a serious possibility that coup could be planned by the incumbent president to kind of create a situation where, come 2006, he will easily become the new president again. You understand? So it's a little bit complicated until we get an independent and authentic investigation. We're never going to know the truth, because when it comes to coups in Africa, it's very complicated. There are a lot of issues involved. That's how I see it.
Okay, yeah, it's true that your point of view could be really critical, but then away from that, we saw the previous, first-hand information as of now, which investigation we should note that is still ongoing. In the West African nation, it stated that this businessman handed over some huge amount of money to the other two, that is the former sports minister as well as the presidential guard, in a bid to tame down their resistance. Now, being that we had key people that may have been very close to the president being involved, could that not seem sort of worrying or be a threat to those that actually constitute the government, or those that surround the incumbent leader?
Okay, like again, when it comes to political governance in Africa, there is no trust. You have people around you who might be wanting and plotting your own downfall. So as far as that is concerned, like I said again, it's complicated. Until the story develops from an independent point of view, we are hardly going to know the truth on the ground. It's a very complicated issue for us to understand as things stand now, who is involved with what and who is not involved. So until things develop rightly, we're not going to know.
Exactly. While we keep following, of course, the Pan-African channel keeps following the updates of what's happening in the West African nation as far as other countries across the continent. And now, Dr. FONGOD, do you share some opinion as far as how controversial this case, which your co-panelists stated that is a political game and may have several stakes involved since the country will be gearing up for elections come 2026?
Yeah, well, at the risk of a lunatic here in relationship to what might be happening out there, I want to state clearly that just like my co-panelist said, it's extremely difficult to know precisely, what's going on. And the reason is because nobody steps up in a vacuum and just decide that they're going to set up any kind of a coup. These things takes months of planning. It takes there are so many people involved, not too many people involved in it for that matter, but there are so many layers rather player involved with this, and there's always that component that someone from the outside, it's literally engineering this.
Absolutely.
It has to be that someone has told whoever that they have their back, that they will take care of them if anything happens, and that's how this thing goes. So there's so many diplomatic channels that we basically have to be looking at, and that's the reason why, I keep saying, for the development or for the freedom of the African continent, it is possible that one day and the continent is free. But if there be any major obstacle is that there is always a need willing to sell a brother for $1. Someone is always there who will step up and say, I'm going to of whatever into, and the reality by it, because the reality is and
good, responsible. So long as we don't prioritize
they are because of peace, and trying to be able to
degree that Africa will work to catch up with AI, the transformation of AI, is the degree to which we are going to develop. Without which, any country that fails or region that fails to catch up with this AI revolution that is taking place today